So today's topic is something that's pretty controversial in the industry, I think, and that is early feeding of our day-old chicks. So feeding them perhaps in the hatchery. Now, to me, from a high-level view, and my all my education has been in more like mammalian biology, it makes sense, right? We want human babies, animal babies, mammal babies. We want them on their milk as soon as possible after birth. In human babies, there are all kinds of benefits shown to feeding that baby earlier, including better bonds to the mother, that sort of thing, and better health overall, blood sugar modulation. So coming from that side, it sounds like feeding your chicks early makes sense. But Keith is here to explain to us whether or not it does make sense, because, of course, a bird is a very different animal from a mammal.
Correct. And there are different kinds of birds, too, but we'll talk about some of those.
So let me go ahead and pop up our presentation for today. There you go.
Okay, we ready to roll?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Like Victoria said, we'll talk about some early feeding, the concept and idea, maybe some pros and cons, but really some additional information I think that needs to be considered. And that's really the big thing, is we need to consider all the aspects of it, not just one particular aspect. And so we'll kind of talk about those and hopefully bring some of those to light. And again, encourage, as we go through this, encourage any types of questions that come up. I can field them as we talk or at the end or whatever, but kind of want this to be maybe a question and answer thing if we can. Particularly me, when I talk about a lot of different things, I like to revert everything back as much as we can to what Mother Nature would do, whether we talk about incubation, feeding, managing, growing. A lot of our industry is set up such that we try and modify natural behavior and mechanism of animals with our management to try and make them fit into our agricultural system and try not to take too much away from what Mother Nature wants them to do or intends them to do. So we can look at, what Mother Nature would do in different systems as far as early feeding. To do that, we really need to look at the two different bird types. Tori talked about the mammalian system, and there are obviously differences between mammals and avian system. Primarily the big one is we're hatching eggs in the avian system rather than the babies being carried within the mother. But even within the avian system, there are two types of embryo development, and the chicks produced from them. It's called altricial and precocial. And we need to differentiate between the two because, again, nature has evolved to a point that the eggs actually develop differently to fit these two systems. So we can look at the altricial and the precocial. Altricial chicks would be like songbirds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that again. But one of the differences in development is set up as far as the egg itself. Our altricial will be like songbirds and such, would have a smaller yolk content, maybe 20% yolk content in some of our more feeble birds that can't do as much right when they hatch. And then we can move on. The chickens, a little over 30% yolk, duck a little over 40%, turkey somewhere in the middle. And then we have some like the kiwi that are even more so. And a lot of that is really dictated and designed as far as the egg formation and composition to enable the birds to survive and live after hatch. And so we really need to keep that in mind as we look at the different bird types. So let's kind of break down these two real quickly. So our altricial chicks, again, those are like songbirds, perching birds, those that nest in trees. They hatch not well developed. They're often naked. They're lacking primarily lacking down. Immobile, cannot fly or walk, confined to nest. The energy primarily goes into the parental care after hatch. Some different reasons why they do this from a natural standpoint is most of these chicks are hatched in nests in trees off the ground. And so they're pretty helpless. Right. And being helpless, they're primarily away from their predators. And so the female will lay eggs, and she might lay these eggs over a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 day period, or maybe even longer. And what they generally will do, if say it's a clutch of 4 eggs, she might lay 2 of the eggs, and when she lays the 3rd egg, she'll start sitting on the whole nest. And then she might lay the 4th egg a couple days later. And so what happens is these chicks will hatch over a 1, 2, 3, maybe even a 4-day period, depending on when she started sitting on the eggs. It's okay for these chicks because they're in a nest and the parents are going to continue to feed them. Right. They're going to bring food to them, and they're just there, and they're protected from their predators. So it's a different type of development system. They are fed immediately after hatch. They don't have the reserves in them in that egg for them to sustain for a couple of days, like some of our others do. So again, nature has developed an egg, a package that fits the altricial type birds. Precocial birds would be our ground-dwelling birds. The young hatch mostly fully developed. Our eyes are open. They have down. They're active. They're mobile. They're not confined to the nest. If you see a hen on a nest, the chicks may wander a little bit from that nest, but they primarily stay right there with the hen. The energy goes into the prenatal development or into that chick, so when the chick hatches, it is ready to be active and move. So let's talk a little bit more about these precocial chicks, which would be our chickens. Primarily like our poultry industry, of course, our birds have been selected for growth, conversion, to be efficient in our system. But turkeys, ducks, pheasant, any of these systems, whether they be wild birds or commercial birds, they still fall under that same category as being a precocial developed chick. They hatch with a warm covering, ability to reasonably maintain body temperature, eyes open, no direct reliance on the parents physically to bring them food, although they do take them to food. The hen in this system is going to lay all her eggs, her entire clutch of eggs, over a period of several days to a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on the clutch size. But she will not begin incubating the eggs until all the eggs are laid. And they try to maintain a very narrow hatch window. So the newly hatched chicks can all be taken from the nest together at the same time by the mother away to look for food. So within this 24-hour period that these chicks are hatching, the first one's hatching, they've got some reserves, they've got some yolk. Mother Nature again has indicated we grow an egg and prepare a chick that is natural for them to wait for everybody to hatch. The precocial chicks, sometimes when they hatch over a 3 or 4 day period, there are times if all the chicks hatch, the last one hatched gets out-competed by its siblings. To some point, they'll get shoved out of the nest. And there's times when that last one just can't eat as much. The others are too big. They take up too much space, and they often just get booted out or they just die. But these birds, we want them all to hatch at the same time so they can start functioning together. The biological mechanisms in place for this to facilitate this. First, the developing chicks in the last stages of development, the last couple of days, they engage in a process called clicking, where they're able to communicate with each other from within the shell, trying to synchronize their hatch time. Again, trying to narrow that hatch window to keep that within that 24-hour period, which we know that happens for most of our ground-dwelling birds. The second is that the eggs produce, these chicks contain a higher percent yolk, so there's more yolk there because they need to rely on that after they hatch. Again, that's what's intended, because once they hatch, they will all remain in the nest. They're going to wait together, so then the mother can take them all to leave the nest together to start eating together. That's what happens in nature, and that's what they're intended to do, is as a group. So they have that yolk reserve. They have reserves in them. The way they've developed and formed, it has set them up to they can make it in that period of time to where the rest of the clutch mates hatch. So nature intended for these chicks to use that available yolk to synchronize the feeding process. First chicks hatch. If the first chicks hatch tried to forage for food without the mother group, they may be subject to predation, so they just stay back, and it's not a detriment to them all to stay back. And then, again, all chicks can feed at the same time, and the first one's utilizing the nutrients of the yolk, waiting till the rest of them hatch. So knowing that these hatch out and how important some of the things in the industry are, moving kind of into some of the things that we do now. And I'm not really, this isn't a discussion on placing chicks and how to manage them in this first 7 days at all. But I'm going to talk about some things that show there's a lot of importance placed on this. It's why we have things like pre-placement checklists. We want all the broilers, we want them off to a good start as soon as possible. That is not debatable. Get them on feed and water as soon as possible. We know that. Have your houses ready, have your feed available, water available, everything ready for them to, to start their growing cycle. Because we know there's tremendous benefits to that. As we take care of these early processes of chick placement, getting the birds started off right, then we have better results. Going back to some historical, I say historical, 2001's not incredibly historical, but it kind of is. And I use this, a good friend of mine, a number of years ago, I remember he put this up and I just kind of stumbled across it the other day and was like, this is not new that we are looking and concerned about what affects our 7-day body weight. This is nothing new. Right. We know this. So what does affect 7-day body weight? Your chick quality, of course. That's why Jamesway put the emphasis in our single stage incubation and hatching equipment to improve our chick quality. The better the chick quality, the better prepared the chicks are to leave the hatchery. We know it's going to have an effect on our 7-day weight if we can get that chick quality and all the other factors are adhered to as far as brooding and raising them. The other thing is chick size. Most people will tell you, that you're going to see a size difference when you place chicks in a house. If you start off with really small chicks, that can certainly have effect on your 7-day body weight. So we want uniformity, and you hear me say that word uniformity. I'm going to say it 1 or 2 more times, maybe more than that the rest of the time we talk here. But it is important because we know that chick size will affect that. We don't encourage or we discourage people from setting incubators with eggs from flocks that are too different in age, partly because a young breeder hen and an older breeder hen, they're gonna lay a different size egg. As the hens age, egg size increases. Obviously, our chick size is going to increase. So 1, it affects our incubation, but 2, we want that chick quality and chick size fairly uniform when we start off in a house.
Right.
You go ask some broiler growers or managers within companies, about what happens when you get this house that's from 6 different flocks of all different ages. It's generally not a really good situation from there on out. So we know we want to manage our chick quality and chick size. Part of that pre-placement checklist I talked about, our house setup, ventilation, food, feeders, water availability. So our food, water, and feeders, that's one of the keys there is once they get in that house, getting on food and water as quickly as possible. We know these things, and it's not, like I said, it's not really debatable. We can go back, much further. I can pull up some new data if we wanted to, but back in '93, this is a data I've used in the past. We can see that they've shown you get birds that are off weight, at 2 weeks, 10 days, 12 days of age. Those same birds are going to maintain that growth period till 40 days of age. So if we delay that feeding, and in this particular study, that's what they did. They just took chicks at hatch and they delayed feeding for 24 hours on one group and put the others right on feed and water. That created 2 growth lines from there on out. And again, this is not anything new. We've known this for a long time. Delayed and starting feed will cause variation in body weight in that those that are eating sooner, those that are on feed later, will have different end weights when they get to the time process. So another bit of data, same thing. We have a difference in our 7-day weight. In this case, some older research as well, 10-gram difference at 7 days. By the time they're out 42 days, that could be as much as 50, 60, 70 grams. So again, we're just kind of setting this stuff up from some, again, this is old data. I mean, you could go on and read literature on this for days about this is not new, and it's very well accepted that the time of they start feed, getting them on feed and water as soon as possible is beneficial. The time they start can affect their growth weight. And again, we're talking about, these are houses of birds, flocks of birds. These are groups of birds. So again, look at the effect of early feed intake on 7-day body weight. They eat more food, they grow more. Nothing surprising. So size, numbers, doesn't matter. For a single chick, we can do different things, okay? If we are talking about a single chick and you are asking me would it be beneficial when chick A hatches, if I got it on food and water as soon as it was ready to be pulled from the hatcher and put on food and water, would that be beneficial to that chick? Sure it would. We know that. We know that for an individual, as soon as we get them on food and water, the better. But the problem is what we're dealing with now is a whole group of chicks.
Right.
So we've got this massive group of chicks. Can we realistically pull each chick out and start it on food and water when it hatches? Well, yes, that's what is being done by some of this early feeding. But now, is that causing us problems down the road? And yes, it can. So we're not talking about single birds. We're talking about a group. How would that affect a group if we start everybody off differently? In the industry, one of the things that we push a lot, and this I've used this chart, anybody's heard me talk before, I've used this chart in several different areas, and it can be used across different areas of the industry. What's the difference between average and uniformity? An average is basically a collective group, and then we get a body weight, a size, a length, whatever it is, and then we will generate an average for that collective group. If that is an ununiform group or uniform group, we could have the exact same average.
Right.
But what we try to do in our industry, in all aspects of our industry, is we try and maintain that uniformity because we want less birds on the fringe. We want less birds too big, too small, too overfleshed, underfleshed, whatever, or eggs even. We want everything closest to that average as possible because we make management decisions on the average.
Right.
Everything we do is on the average. Our own multi-stage incubation equipment, that's how we ran those machines on the average. So what is the average temperature we try and put in that machine to appease all the developing embryos? Now, the system allowed there to be some differences just by the nature of the design of the equipment. But again, we couldn't necessarily give each group exactly what they wanted. We worked on the average. So the industry is very familiar with this and used to this. And you wonder if uniformity is important. The other day I was pulling off some of our primary breeders, their information, and you can just go through all the information. Uniformity, live weight information. Investigate farms, look at those that, if their expected uniformity levels are different, variable weight gains. They show us how to collect our CV value or to measure uniformity. This would be an indication if you're taking birds to a processing plant, if your customer wants a 2.0 kilogram bird, what you want of those birds sent to process is the maximum number of them to be within their specific range.
Right.
So the farther we get some out of that specific range, it then doesn't match what our customers want. And then we have some birds that have to go elsewhere. So, as broiler tech service managers, producers, whatever, one of the things they do is they want to watch that uniformity, and they want keep the flock uniform, even a broiler flock. But also they have to monitor that to make sure when they go to the processing plant, they are going to be hitting the targets that they want. And you get more birds in that target by maintaining that uniformity. So another management guide, egg size, the main factor affecting chick size. So there again, we want to maintain a uniform egg size because that can result in a uniform chick size. When we place chicks, one reason we recommend similar age flocks source in a single house might be for biosecurity reasons, but also because we're trying to place birds that come from a similar breeder flock, age, size of egg, whatever. Again, uniformity, looking at flock uniformity. uniformity, looking at the parent flock uniformity, again, what things can affect our birds to be in uniform. We spend a lot of time talking about uniformity because
Right.
it is important in a lot of aspects of our industry. So we just kind of go through and show you several areas. I mean, you can just pull things out throughout and look at discussion about uniformity because it's very important and prevalent in what we do in our industry. So let's go back now to this original graph we looked at. If we were to look at this and say, okay, if we put birds in a house and some had been on feed for, just starting as they've been put down the house and some had been on feed for 24 hours and then grew them out, we would likely not expect great uniformity from this flock because we know the data goes back almost as long as people have been doing research on this type of thing, and they all come to the same conclusion. You need to get everybody started first or together, their first feed together, so we're all in that fitting like a blue line.
Right.
Delay starting feed will cause variation in body weight. When I talk about uniformity too, and we kind of branch off on a couple of other things, this is not, we're talking primarily here about broilers and chicks. I mean, this is something that we do throughout the industry. And I think I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I just wanted to bring it up now. I spent a number of years working the breeder side of the industry as well and working with breeders. And that is very critical to say we have got to have uniform birds from the time they're placed to the time they come in production, to the point that you get birds, the uniformity you start losing uniformity early on. You really, it's difficult to ever bring that back together. We get the best performance from those birds when we manage that uniformity. Now, could we take a house of 10,000 replacement breeders? Could we take that and manage them in a way that, well, you know what, instead of lighting them at 21 weeks, I bet there's some in there that are ready to be lit at 18 weeks and would probably come into production, and they would. Some at 19, some at 20, some at 21. You would have a range of when birds are ready to come into production just by the nature of variation within a flock or within a group. There's always extremes on both ends. So we could then pull some birds out and say, well, these are ready to go. Let's go ahead and put them in the house. But we don't do that. A couple of reasons. One, we've been shown that when we're narrowing that uniformity and feeding for the average, we get better egg production performance. But also we want to build the same frame on the birds to get the same egg size, so if we get the same chick size. So clear back in the breeders, we could pull some out that were ready and say, well, why not? We got some that are ready to go. Let's go ahead and get them on the train to where they need to go, but we don't do that. We withhold them on purpose. We hold them back on purpose, build the same bird, because a breeder, the market, however you want to say that, their product is a hatching egg. So we want the birds to produce as many hatching eggs as possible, as many hatching eggs of equal size. If we're talking about table eggs, eggs for consumption, same thing as we want a whole house of laying chickens to lay eggs very similar size. So they can hit the market together. We want them to come in quick and then be very similar in size. That's what our consumers want. So we can look at a lot of areas